Hey there, everyone. I'm currently in the George Hotel in Washington, D.C. I'm here accompanying my husband who's on a work-related trip, and I just thought I'd take a minute to record a video or two. So this video is going to be my Comedy Geek favorites. I'm going to do these reoccurring videos because, as many of you know, I am a self-proclaimed comedy geek. I've been very much into comedy since I was a child. I used to watch SNL and stand-up comedy specials way before I should have been allowed to, but it has molded me into who I am today. At 16, I've told the story many times, at 16 I started sneaking into comedy clubs in New York City, mainly the Comedy Cellar. I befriended comedians like Greg Giraldo and Robert Kelly and Jim Norton and a ton of folks that thankfully I still remain good friends with. And since then, I started producing my own stand-up comedy shows. I'm an event planner. I've been doing that since college, and I've continued to do that through comedy and now through my work in government. But anyway, I love comedy, and I know that a lot of people out there do as well, and if you're not, then I'm going to slowly introduce you into some of the things that I'm really into. And so this is my first Comedy Geek favorites. It's going to be my ultimate favorites, and I'm going to start off with books. My favorite comedy book, nonfiction, is a book called Wigfield by Stephen Colbert, Paul Dinello, and Amy Sedaris. It is by far one of the funniest books I have ever read. It's really just so ridiculous and just very much in that Stephen Colbert character voice. Very much like the character, just self-involved, egomaniacal, and just really hilarious. And so they all wrote this book together. They have great characters. You can either pick up the book or the audiobook, or both. I have both, because the book is really funny, and then to hear them perform it is fantastic. So it's about someone who wants to be a writer and somehow manages to get a book company to agree to buy this book from him, and now he has to go on this journey to write the great American book. And it's just hilarious. The characters are fantastic. It's so, so funny. I definitely recommend it. My favorite nonfiction comedy book right now for the true comedy geek, someone who just loves humor, who is interested in perhaps going into a career in humor writing, whether it's for TV or essayist, to be an essayist, or just all kinds of humor. It's called And Here's the Kicker by Mike Sachs. It is a book of essays by many different people in the comedy humor world. It includes Stephen Colbert. It includes not only essays about their experiences in comedy, but also tips, and tons of stand-up comedians, TV writers. It's just a brilliant book. I literally highlighted almost everything in it because I do some comedy writing myself, or at least I'm trying to do it more regularly, and I'm going to try and pursue that in the new year. That's going to be my resolution, to do a lot more writing. And so it's just helpful just to see these people's journeys. They're now incredibly successful, and so you want to know how they started, what their experiences were like, what their process is, and just hear some funny stories along the way and some really helpful tips if you want to be a comedy writer or a humorist. And those are my two favorite books that I'm going to recommend, my top two books that I would always recommend someone who's interested in comedy writing or just humor, comedy in general. Podcasts. The podcast that I'm currently completely obsessed with and in love with, and I've been trying to get everyone I know to listen to it, which isn't very hard, is by J.R. Havlin, and it's called Writer's Block. You can download it through iTunes. Writer's Block is an amazing podcast where J.R., for each episode, he sits down with a brilliant comedy writer and talks about what their process is, how they got into the business, stories, and it's just, not only is it incredibly insightful and informative. Again, if you want to be a comedy writer, you should definitely listen to this podcast because you'll see how these people got started. You see what their writing process is. You see how they got their job. You'll hear obviously hear. You'll hear how they got their jobs. And the other fun part is that you're basically just listening into a conversation between two comedy geniuses. If you don't know who J.R. Havlin is, shame on you, because he is a brilliant, brilliant writer. He is one of the original writers for The Daily Show. He's been on the show since the beginning. He's won countless Emmys because of his work on the show. It's just so great and fun to hear him interact with these other comedy geniuses. His first podcast is with Liz Winstead, who is one of the co-creators of The Daily Show, and she talks about how she created the show, what her experience was like and is through her comedy, and not only in writing for shows, but through her stand-up comedy as well. He goes on to interview Rachel Axler, who is another brilliant young writer who has worked on The Daily Show and Parks and Recreations, and it's great to hear her experience, how she started out, because she actually started out by taking JR's writing class. So it's just really insightful and very funny because you've got two funny people just talking for however long the podcast is. I'm completely in love with it. I love it so much. I've just been spreading the word, and I'm really excited that I can share it with you. Definitely check out Writer's Block. The DVD I'm going to include in this favorites video is probably going to be my all-time favorite forever because it is based on a show that I worked on for almost 4 whole years. It's called Tell Your Friends the Concert Movie, and it is part performance video concert and part documentary. It takes a look at the alternative comedy scene in New York, how it started, who was involved, and it interviews great comedians who are part of the alternative comedy scene. And it also shows what you would see at a regular Tell Your Friends show. Tell Your Friends was a show that was done weekly in the basement of a bar on the Lower East Side called Lolita. It's still there, so if you're in New York City, go check out Lolita. It's one of my favorite bars. They're great, great people, so check it out. But it was a free show for many years, and then we started charging $5 for it, but it was always one of the long-standing best shows in New York because you got to see these amazing performers, writers, humorists, ventriloquists, all kinds of comedy in this basement of a bar in New York City. And the magic behind this show is that it was a workout room for all of these writers. So people from Saturday Night Live, people from The Daily Show, people from Colbert, people from Late Night, you name it, came to the show and worked on new material. So it was such a great experience because the audience had this, they knew what they were getting into. They were welcoming and they made the performer feel comfortable. They knew that they weren't going to hear perfectly worked out jokes, but that was the brilliance of it. You can see these brilliant comedians like Jim Gaffigan. You can see him work out a joke and you'll be one of the first people to ever hear this joke, and a few months later or a year later you'll see it on a special on HBO or Showtime. And that was what was so great about Tell Your Friends. So we worked on this film about 2 years ago, and it's finally being distributed by aspecialthing.com. Go to A Special Thing Records, Google it, and it's available for purchase for I think about $13 or $15, but I promise you, you will not regret buying it. I won't get a dime out of it, so don't think that that's why I'm recommending it, but if you're truly a comedy geek, you have to see this film because, again, the documentary component of it is really great because you hear from these individual performers, and it includes Reggie Watts, Curtin Kristen, Jim Gaffigan, just lots of performers, and you'll hear their stories about how they started off in the alternative comedy scene, what exactly is the alternative comedy scene. You'll hear it from them, what they believe, what it is. So great interviews, great documentary portion, and then you have the concert portion, which is basically you get to sit down and watch an amazing show in between these interviews and see what a Tell Your Friends show was like, except that it's in the Tell Your Friends concert was actually made in the beautiful Bell House in Brooklyn, which is a beautiful, gorgeous theater in the Gowanus, and not the basement of a bar. But you'll have a great time. I highly recommend it. I promise you, you'll love it. If you're a comedy geek, you have to get it. So this has been my first ever Comedy Geek Favorites. I hope you enjoyed it, and I know I'm certainly going to look forward to doing more and more of these where I'm recommending my friends' books, more movies, and specials that you would definitely want to hear. Thanks again for watching. Make sure you're subscribed and comment below. Tell me who your favorite comedian is. I'd love to hear what your thoughts on the alternative comedy scene, if you're a fan, if you don't understand what it is, etc. I just love hearing from you guys. Take care, and thanks for watching. I was about to publish this video when I realized that I hadn't talked about my favorite comedy album. My favorite comedy album will not be a surprise to most of the people who know me. It is Greg Giraldo's Good Day to Cross a River. Greg Giraldo remains one of my all-time favorite comedians. He was a brilliant, brilliant man, a really lovely person, and he passed away a few years ago, and it still hurts so much, his passing. I really, really loved him. He is actually the reason that I got into stand-up comedy. I started watching Tough Crowd with Colin Quinn, and he was one of the regulars there, and I just fell in love with stand-up comedy because of that show and the people on it, and him specifically. I just thought he was a brilliant, brilliant, quick-witted person, and when I went to the Comedy Cellar, it was to watch him and some of the other folks on Tough Crowd. I got to know him, I got to meet him. I'm very lucky to have met him and to have known him for a few years before he passed on, before he passed away, and I still miss him, and it still kills me that I will never be able to see him again, both in person and in performance, because he was just so great. He was amazing. He was definitely one of the best ever. So definitely get A Good Day to Cross the River, because it's still hilarious years after it was recorded, and I promise you, you won't regret it. It's brilliant.